We've all seen the victory feasts on screen, the raised drinking horns, the laughter, the treasures stacked high. But another story begins once the fires burn low. A tale rarely spoken of. It is the story of the noble women, queens, princesses, and daughters of chieftains whose halls had just fallen. Their fate wasn't a side note. It was part of the strategy. This isn't a tale of rescue or romance. It is about what followed when the celebration ended, when the true cost of defeat came due. Here are 7 of those fates. If you value carefully documented history like this, make sure to subscribe. It's the best way to keep this work alive. Also, share in the comments which city you're watching from. This account is grounded in sources such as the Annals of Ulster and the Laxdœla saga. Now, back to the story. Number 1. The Women of Arth. The Irish Coast. The record in the Annals of Ulster is chilling in its brevity, written like a cold infantry for the year 821. It notes, Aider was ravaged by the heathens, and many women were carried away into captivity. Aider, today known as Hal, stood on a peninsula guarding the northern entrance to Dublin Bay. It was a critical stronghold. The raid was no random strike. It was a deliberate seizure of resources. And in the 9th century, the most precious resource was people. These women, stripped of their families and rank in a single brutal act, were reclassified under Norse law as rael, the lowest rung of society, property rather than person. Their journey into bondage began on the decks of Viking-long ships crammed together as human cargo. The voyage itself was a test of endurance. Only the strongest survived the harsh Atlantic crossing. Their likely destination was the growing Viking settlement of Difflin, modern Dublin, which became one of the largest slave markets in Western Europe. There they were inspected, priced, and sold. A healthy young woman might fetch between 12 and 20 ounces of silver, equal to the yearly output of a small farm. Some were bought by Norse colonists in Ireland. Others shipped further to Hedby in Denmark, Birka in Sweden, or trafficked through the river routes of the Rus into the massive slave systems of Bantium and the Avist Caliphate. Skills once tied to noble birth, weaving, healing, only raised their value as merchandise. The annals record no names. They were reduced to figures in a ledger. Their lives deliberately erased and absorbed into the Viking world's economy. Confiscated, catalogued, silenced. Number 2. Melora, daughter of Murake. Mid-10th century Ireland to Iceland. The Icelandic Laxa saga, written 2 centuries later, preserves the name of one such captive. Mela was the daughter of an Irish king, Musatak. Around the year 956, her life was shattered by a Viking raid. She was taken, transported to Norway, and placed for sale in a busy market. There she was noticed by Hörskoldur Dalakolsson, a wealthy Icelander traveling on trade sanctioned by King Hakon of Norway. Struck by her dignity and beauty, he asked the trader her name. The seller, a rust merchant called Gilly, claimed ignorance. Hörskoldur paid 3 marks of silver, an immense sum. 1 mark equaled 80, meaning he handed over 24 ounces, 3 times the value of a prime milk cow. With her, he purchased silence for the voyage to Iceland, and years afterward, Melkorka spoke no word. She lived in his household as a concubine, a friller, and bore him a son named Olafur. To all, even to Hörskoldur, she appeared mute. It was her shield, a desperate attempt to keep a fragment of herself in a world where she held no power. The truth surfaced by chance. One day, Hörskoldur passed a stream near his farm and overheard Mela speaking softly to her son, teaching him Gaelic, her native tongue. The saga preserves her words. She told the boy that his grandfather was Muir Shirtak, king of the Irish. Confronted, she revealed her true identity. Her position improved somewhat within the household, but she was never granted freedom. She remained in Iceland, a captive princess whose identity came to light only by accident. Her son, Aleth, grew to be a renowned chieftain called Olafur the Peacock, famed for his splendid attire. He later sailed to Ireland with rich cargo, met his grandfather, the king, and was recognized as kin. But Mel Corkin never returned. She died in Iceland, far from the kingdom that was her birthright. Bought, hidden, exposed. Number 3. The Abbess of Coldingham, 870, Northumbria, Scotland. In the autumn of 870, the great heathen army, which had plagued England for 5 years, marched north. Its leaders were the infamous sons of Ragnar Lothbrok. Among them, Ivar the Boneless, and Halfdan. Their next target was the monastery at Coldingham, a double house of both monks and nuns perched on a storm-swept cliff above the North Sea. The abbeys, remembered later as Eie the Younger, knew precisely what awaited. Raids on religious houses were notorious not only for looting and bloodshed, but for the violation of the women inside. For Ebe and her sisters, this fate was worse than death. A desecration that, in their devout worldview, stained the soul itself. As the army closed in, Eie gathered her community in the chapter house. The account preserved by the 13th-century chronicler Matthew Paris in his Florus Historium spares no detail. She took up a razor and before all present sliced off her nose and upper lip, leaving her face a mask of blood. She then commanded the other nuns to do the same. "Make yourselves a horror to the lust of the barbarians." One after another, the nuns obeyed their abbeys. They followed her dreadful example, cutting their own faces until the room was filled with women bearing wounds so horrific that no Viking could see beauty in them. So when the Norse warriors finally broke through Singham's defenses and stormed into the chapter house, they didn't find cowering victims. Instead, they were confronted with a silent, unyielding circle of women who had already chosen their fate. The invaders, furious that their prize had been stolen from them in such a way, unleashed their rage. Rather than sparing a single soul, they sealed the doors shut, stacked timber against the strong stone walls, and set the building on fire. The monastery burned with the abbess and her entire community still inside. Their decision had not been between survival and death, but between two different kinds of endings. They had chosen the flames. Their bones mingled with ash and charcoal, sinking into the cliffside earth where their convent once stood, burned, buried, yet unbroken. If you value carefully researched history like this, consider subscribing. It's the most direct way to support what we do here. And let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. This story and many others like it is built from primary sources such as the Chronicles of Matthew Paris, along with archaeological studies of Viking Age settlements. Now, let's return to the record. Number 4. The Women of Canterbury, 1011, the heart of Kent, England. For nearly 3 relentless years, a massive Danish force under the command of Thorol the Tall had been devastating the south of England. King Ethel, known to later generations as the Unready, had tried a policy of paying off the invaders with increasingly larger amounts of denield. But rather than securing peace, these bribes had only encouraged further assaults. By September of 1011, the Danes set their sights on Canterbury, the religious center of all England, the seat of its archbishop, and one of the most important cities of the kingdom. For 20 days, the inhabitants resisted. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records a desperate and spirited defense. But ultimately, betrayal came from within. A man named Elmar, whose life had once been spared by Archbishop Elfia himself, opened the gates to the Danes. What followed was carnage. The Vikings poured into Canterbury and seized its leaders. Archbishop Elfhere, Elfgar, the King's Reeve, Leifrin, the abbeys of St. Sain, Mildred's, and Godwine, Bishop of Rochester. The invaders captured both the religious and civic elite of the city in one swoop. Then they turned to destruction. Christ Church, Canterbury's great cathedral, was stripped and desecrated while much of the population was slaughtered. But not everyone perished. Some, especially the noble women, were considered too valuable to kill. Leifrin, the abbeys, and Elfgar's household were kept alive. Their lives transformed into bargaining chips in a brutal negotiation. 4 months, these captives endured a limbo of fear. Their fates determined by men with swords and shifting moods. Archbishop Elfia, revered for his defiance, refused to permit a ransom to be paid for himself. He famously declared he would not allow the church's silver to be wasted on his release. His captives grew increasingly frustrated. In April of 1012, at a drunken gathering in Greenwich, that frustration boiled over. The warriors hurled animal bones at the archbishop before one of them delivered the final blow with an axe. His martyrdom was swift and brutal. The women, however, remained part of the ongoing transaction. A year later, an immense ransom was agreed upon, 48,000 pounds of silver, a staggering sum for the time. This wealth purchased the withdrawal of Thor's army. The release of the captured women was almost certainly part of this bargain. Their survival wasn't won by mercy or chance, but by arithmetic. Their freedom calculated alongside weighty silver ingots in what was essentially a national payment to halt devastation. For the women of Canterbury, their ordeal meant being reduced to pieces in a larger game of politics and power. Their identities, their dignity, their suffering were all secondary to their function as hostages, held, ransomed, and erased from the record. Their lives measured in silver, not in stories. Number 5. The Captives of Dumbarton Rock, 870. The Kingdom of Strathclyde, Scotland. While the great heathen army under Halfdan and Ivar the Boneless ravaged monasteries in the east, another coalition of Vikings struck from the west. Leading them were Olaf for the White, the Norse king of Dublin, and his ally Ivar. Their goal was ambitious. The fortress of Alclut today known as Dumbarton Rock, the seat of the Strathclyde Britons. Rising from the banks of the River Clyde, this volcanic crag was considered all but impregnable. For 4 months, the defenders held out against the onslaught. The attackers could not scale the sheer cliffs, so instead they turned to siege tactics. They surrounded the stronghold and crucially cut off its water supply. After 12 agonizing days, the annals record that the well inside Dumbarton ran dry. Thirst did what swords and ladders could not. Starving for water, the defenders finally surrendered. What happened next was staggering. The Viking force stripped the fortress of wealth and people alike. The chronicles describe one of the largest mass enslavements of the entire Viking era in Britain. Elifar and Ivar lingered for the winter on the Clyde, gathering their spoils. By 871, they were ready to return to Dublin. A fleet of 200 ships carried them back, not just with plunder, but with a vast human cargo. The annals of Ulster state that they returned with a great prey of men, Angles, Britons, and Picts alike. Among the captives was Arthgal, king of Strathclyde, along with his family. His wife and the noble women of the court, once symbols of power and prestige, were now property to be bought and sold. Argyll himself did not survive long. The record notes he was later executed in Dublin at Olifar's command. For the women, no royal lineage could shield them. They were marched into Dublin's slave market, assessed like livestock. Their ranks, titles, and lives as queens or princesses evaporated in the face of this new reality. Their only worth lay in what price a buyer would pay. This episode reveals the scale and cold efficiency of Viking slaving operations. Raiding was never simply about treasure. Human beings were the ultimate prize. The siege of Dumbarton was not an accident of war. It was a calculated move to feed a market hungry for slaves. The women of Strathclyde, once noble figures in their homeland, became anonymous entries in the ledgers of trade, thirsted, surrendered, and shipped across the sea. Number 6. The Wives of the Settlers, late 9th century Iceland. The Land Namibok, or Book of Settlements, is one of the key sources for the early colonization of Iceland. Its pages often frame the story as one of daring explorers seeking freedom and new beginnings. Yet hidden within its lines are stark reminders of what that society was built upon: the capture and forced transport of women. The saga of Ingamon the Old, a powerful Norwegian chieftain, illustrates this clearly. Before establishing himself in Iceland, his followers, including his foster brothers, launched raids on Ireland. The Landma book does not romanticize this. It records bluntly that the men returned with captives, women taken by force to become the wives and concubines of Iceland's founding families. These women were not volunteers in a bold colonial experiment. They were unwilling participants dragged across the sea and compelled into roles that built the foundation of a new society. Their labor, their children, their very bodies became the pillars upon which Icelandic culture was erected. The book's term mention, little more than a line, hides the trauma behind it. To the chroniclers, it was a fact, not a tragedy. But to the women stripped from Ireland and carried to a foreign land, it was a lifetime sentence. Their names vanish from the records, absorbed into the genealogies of their captives. They were remembered only as the foremothers of lineages, not as individuals with stories of their own. In the grand saga of Iceland's settlement, they were present at the beginning, but their voices were silenced, captured, carried, and erased. They stand as the forgotten foundation of a new land. Among the settlers recorded in the land Namib was an Irish noblewoman named Refgard. She was taken captive by a Viking named Ivar Sorkfer and forced into marriage in the cold, demanding land of Iceland. Her life was not unique. Another chieftain, Kettle the Foolish, is said to have established his settlement at Kirk Jabbar. The chronicle notes that because he was a Christian, no heathen followers would join him. Yet in time, his descendants married into families whose maternal lines traced back to women originally seized from Ireland. These stories preserved in sagas are not mere folklore. Modern genetic studies confirm their truth. DNA testing has revealed that while the overwhelming majority of Iceland's founding men carried Norse paternal ancestry, a strikingly high percentage of its founding women, as many as 63%, traced their maternal roots to Ireland and Scotland. The numbers are stark. For every chieftain who claimed land and built a farmstead, there were women taken unwillingly across the sea, their fates bound to lives they did not choose. They were compelled into unions, transformed into wives and mothers against their will. From their bodies and labor came the first generations of Icelanders. The nation's foundation was not one of free will, but one of force, transplanted, plundered, and replanted into unfamiliar soil. These women became the living cornerstones of a society born out of conquest. Number 7. The Lady of the Osberg Ship, 834, Vestfold, Norway. In 1904, archaeologists excavating a burial mound near the Oslof uncovered what is still regarded as the most extraordinary Viking artifact ever discovered. The Osberg ship, preserved in blue clay, emerged from the earth in near-perfect condition. Measuring 21 m long and carved from oak, the vessel was a work of breathtaking artistry. Its prow curled upward into the form of a serpent, intricate spirals etched into the wood. Within the burial chamber built into the ship, dating by dendrochronology to the summer of 834, lay treasures that spoke of immense wealth and rank. A richly decorated wooden cart, 3 ceremonial sledges, beds, woven tapestries, ornate chests, and the sacrificed remains of 15 horses and 4 dogs. 2 human skeletons rested within. The first was an elderly woman estimated to be between 70 and 80 years old. Her bones bore evidence of advanced cancer. Scholars have long believed she was a woman of extraordinary influence, possibly a queen, a high priestess, or both. The second body was of a woman around 50 years old. For generations, it was assumed she had been the attendant of the elder, a loyal companion, perhaps a servant of high standing who chose or was compelled to follow her mistress into the afterlife. But recent science has shifted this interpretation. Analysis of the younger woman's mitochondrial DNA uncovered a haplogroup, exceedingly rare in Scandinavia. Instead, this genetic marker is most commonly found around the Black Sea and into regions of Iran. This detail suggests she was not native to Norway, but from a distant land to the east. Her bones reveal further evidence. Isotopic study of her diet indicates that for most of her life she had eaten little protein consistent with regions far from Scandinavia. Yet in her final years, her diet suddenly changed, aligning with the protein-rich meals typical of the Norse elite. The implication is unsettling. She had not always lived in Norway. Instead, she may have been brought there as a captive, a woman of noble birth, taken during a raid, uprooted from her homeland, and placed into the household of the powerful Osberg queen. Her life may have seemed privileged compared to that of an ordinary, yet she remained property all the same. When the elder woman died, so too did she. Whether her death was voluntary as part of ritual or forced upon her is impossible to say. What is clear is that her role in burial was not about her own honor. She was included as part of her mistress's display. Her body, one more offering to mark the power of the woman who owned her. The splendor of the Osberg ship was for the elder. The younger was evidence of the ultimate act of possession. Her identity erased, her existence reduced to service in both life and death. Bound, buried, forgotten. The written records do not end there. In 2009, during construction of a relief road for the 2012 Olympic Games in Dorset, England, a shocking discovery was made. On Ridgeway Hill, workers uncovered a mass grave. Inside a pit lay the skeletons of 54 young men. The remains bore signs of execution. Nearby, piled separately, were 51 skulls. Forensic analysis dated the event to around the year 1. Chemical isotopes in the men's teeth, which preserve the geology of the land where a person grows up, revealed the truth of their origins. They were Scandinavians, Vikings, one even from north of the Arctic Circle. These were not farmers or settlers. They were a war band captured and systematically executed by local Anglo-Saxon forces. It was a brutal moment of resistance, a rare reversal of fortune for the Norse. Yet such an event is striking in its rarity. Across chronicles like the Annals of Ulster and the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, references to captured Viking men are scarce. More often, the records repeat a different pattern. Entries of raiding parties carrying off women by the dozens, sometimes by the hundreds. The Ridgeway Hill mass grave may show the destruction of one Viking crew. But for every such episode, countless other ships returned safely to Scandinavia or to their colonies laden with captives. Human beings, women most of all, were the invisible treasure of the Viking Age. They were the true spoils of war, carried away in silence, their lives transformed beyond recognition. These women seldom appear by name in the surviving documents. Their presence is recorded not as individuals but as numbers. Commodities valued in silver catalogued in lines by monks who saw their communities emptied. Their worth was economic, but their loss was absolute. For the Vikings they were currency. For history they became ghosts.